Oh my goodness, is that comedy legend Slug-a-Glove? Slug-Glove, how about a joke for the fans? You will die on the 8th of December, 2064. Your family will be there. They'll look like they're upset. You will know they're not. And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part, and in this part... Boid. And welcome back to Devlog. It's me, your host, Slug-Glove. In this part of the devlog, we'll be talking about the boid function for the new enemy logic in the bug brutality level. What are boids, you may be asking? I don't know, some math thing. Why add boids to the level? Originally the design for the beast brutality level was to have it being the beast brutality, a big monster chases you and punches Pep-Pel in the soft spot of her skull, killing her. I animated this monster and I put it on the level and it wasn't fun at all. It made the level very, very short, 2 minutes at most, and it made the actual enjoyment of the level pretty basic. All you do is run from a monster, there isn't a whole lot of complexity to it. So then I thought, well, what if I have a monster that organically chases the player? And then I thought, what if this monster was maybe created with a coding system, like a mathematical system, so I don't have to actually have any animated logic for the monster chasing you? And what if the monster's design is a swarm of bugs? So, I don't know, I don't have to actually design anything for the design of the monster, it can just be weird little bug things. Now that's a good idea, baby. So I did that. Essentially, the original design of the beast brutality level was too unruly and would take too long to make in a way that I felt like would be satisfying for the level, and also the design wasn't fun to begin with, so I just reworked the entire system to then make a boid-based system for enemies that would then chase the player organically through the level. But what is a boid, you may ask? Some mathematical thing where the enemy is created with a bunch of different units, and then the units will navigate through system space relative to some arbitrary rules that I create for the boids. In this instance, the rules for the boids are very simple. I create a polygon collider that I say the boids cannot exit. I make the boids always move towards the player's direction. I have the boids fall downwards if there is not any ground below them or another boid below them. This is important for later. I will make the boids be slightly detracted from each other if they move too close to each other, and I will make the boids be slightly attracted to each other if they are too far away. Essentially, I make a nice, reasonable distance where the boids will be drawn together in a big clump, but not be too close that they overlap from each other. If they get too close from each other, they'll be pushed away. If they get too far, they will be pulled back together. And that is the very basics of the boids functionality of how they work. Okay, end of devlog, bye bye! Let's explain the actual basics of each individual functionality of the boids. The first thing the boid script has to do is create its boids, these being called the bugs. I have two forms of these. I have the animated forms and I have the non-animated forms. The reasoning for this is each boid cluster has around 20 to 40 boids within it, and the issue with this is if they all had an animator attached to them, first of all, there's no real reason for them to all have an animator. At this level, they're all going to be pretty much clustered together. You're not being able to distinguish one boid from another, so them all having a detailed animated system is not really necessary. The second reason is if one chunk of the level has maybe 30 boids in it, the chunk next to it has another 30, the chunk next to it on the other side has another 30, that's 90 animated units in total if they all had an animator, and this slows the game down a lot. So, when creating a boid, we have a mathematical function based on the actual integer of which boid we are creating. So, however many boids there are, let's say there's 5, we'll have a percentage of these that are made with an animator and a percentage of these that are made without an animator. The without an animator boids are very, very simple. I just remove the arms, I remove the wings, I take off the animator components, and I just create a copy of this boid. The boids with an animator are very simple. They have all the body parts, they have an animator, and that is the only difference of these actual game objects that are created as the boids. By default, every 1 in 4 boids is going to be animated. So 1 in 4 will have the animator function, 3 and 4 will not have the animated function. If the graphical quality is set to medium, 1 in 7 boids is going to have an animator. If the graphical quality is set to low, 1 in 10 boids is going to have the animator. This is basically if the graphics is set to low, then the player's computer is not going to be able to process as much, so I just make less boids be animated. It is a very simple system to make the boids be less hardware intensive when they are created and moving in the level. In terms of actual coding, the boids themselves, the actual game object, very, very simple. They are a sphere, they have the hazard component attached to them, they have an animator, or they do not have an animator. That's it, baby! Nothing else is involved in the boids. It's a circle. After creating all the boids, I will have a class within the boid spawning system that will keep track of all the game objects of the boids, their position, their momentum, their acceleration, and also the boid's current state, because it is a system created by me, so of course a state system must be implemented. If the boids are within 50 units of the player, they will have logic that moves them towards the player. If they are not in 50 units of the player, these boids will not move at all, and they will be left to their own devices, because these are not going to be any distance that the player will need to interact with these boids, so they can be set to their idling state. This means that the function does not have to run for every single boid, just the boids that are active. If the boid is not sleeping, we are going to lerp its momentum towards wherever the player's current direction is. So if the player is to the right of the boid, we're going to move this boid in the right direction multiplied by the speed of these boids. These boids have a control value and an acceleration value that is going to control how easily they adjust to new values and how quickly they speed up to their maximum movement speed. So it's not just a binary not moving and then moving. There is a easing to this and the more natural movement to the way the boids look. So we're just moving in one direction. We're then going to check if there is any ground below the boid. This is also very easy. All we're going to do is check the polygon collider that the boids have as a component in the spawner. This is the area the boids can in-surface. If the point below the boid by 1 unit is outside of the polygon collider, and I'll get onto how I calculate that in a moment, because it's unnecessarily complicated how one would have to have a function for if a point is outside of a polygon collider. There should just be a function for that in Unity, but whatever. If the point is outside of the polygon, we're going to know that this boid is on a flat surface in the polygon and not move them downwards. If it is not outside of the polygon, we're going to check every single boid and see if there is a boid below this boid, so there's no boid for them to fly on top of, and if there is, we'll have no gravity applied based on the distancing. If there is not, we'll have gravity applied based on the distance that the floor is, or the fake floor that the polygon collider of the boids are contained within is from the actual boid. So if there is no ground below the boid, we're going to be moving them down at the rate of 26 every single frame, and if there is, we're just going to ignore this value and they can move freely on the y-axis. This is a very easy way for them to be able to pile up on top of each other. Basically, boids, if they have a boid below them, will be able to float higher and ascend and essentially climb up the boid pile. This is how I make it so the boids can shuffle around and make these weird organic piles where they seem to be piling on top of each other. This is just a system which is basically if a boid has a boid below it, they can ignore gravity. Is the simplest way that the boids can climb each other. Now that we've covered boid movement, we can cover boid closeness and awayness. These are two values that I maybe should have named differently because they sound silly, but this is essentially if the boid is close to another boid, they will be pushed away. If the boids are too far from the boid mass, they will be pulled toward the mass. This is very simple. I have a value of how intense this should be. The boid togetherness is 8, the boid awayness is 0.5, so they're going to be drawn together more than they are drawn away from each other. If a boid is within 1 unit of another boid, they will be pushed away because this is an overlapping distance. If the boid is 8 units away from the boid mass, they're going to be pulled back towards the mass by a value relative to how distant they are from the mass. So if the boid is 8 units away, they're going to be pulled by a value of 30. If the boid is 4 units away, they're going to be pulled by a value of 15, for example, so it is relative to the boid mass. This just keeps the boids together and further away. This does not alter their momentum, it's just a value added on top of this that slightly moves the boids based on the distance to other boids. Basically, we're just moving them towards or away from the big mass of boids. just keeping them together in an organic looking mass. Without the system, they kind of all fly in any direction, and they don't work as a big mass of insects because they all have independent movements, and also, for obvious reasons, this is a lot harder to dodge and move about as a player because there's no actual organic semblance of structure to the Boid pile. It's just, there's a big swarm of insects getting you. Run away. In opposed to a pile of AI movements that you can somewhat predict because they're all moving in uniform. You guys hear about this Elden Ring DLC? Crazy, right? The next thing I have to do is make it so the boids are maintained within the polygon collider that I have created for these. The reason for this is very obvious. I didn't want to have actual physics for the boids to navigate the entire level of Pep-Pel because that's tedious, and I didn't want to, and it didn't work with level designs. I wanted the boids to have very fixed areas that they exist and act within. First of all, this being easier to design levels for. Second of all, it's easier to design levels for. Third of all, the chunk system in Pep-Pel meant that having a creature that had a weird boid function navigating the entire level would be very unruly to actually design a level for, and the third reason being that I didn't want to. So my system was to add a polygon collider that is a trigger object of the actual beast spawner that all the beasts that are a child of the spawner will have to be contained within. This was very complicated to actually do. Originally I had used the polygon bound section to see if the beasts were inside of the polygon, but for some reason the bound system just dictates the actual square box around the polygon and does not dictate the polygon itself if the object is within or without the polygon. For some reason, I understand this is just a system that Unity uses for bounding boxes for objects, but what is the point of this system, you may ask, if it does not actually dictate if the object is within the collider itself? And pointless, if you ask me, little old Sluglove. Who uses the bound system? What's the purpose? Where would you come into Anyway, so the system I have devised, and this is not the system I devised, I just read forums on people figuring this out, is just use a mathematical formula for drawing a line through a polygon and then counting the amount of collisions with the polygon to determine if an object is inside or outside of the polygon. If I extend the point of the beast that I am testing in an infinite direction towards the right, and by infinite I mean 100 units, depending on the amount of times it intersects or desects, depending on the amount of times it collides with an edge of a polygon, I can determine if it's inside or outside of the polygon. An even number of collisions would mean that the object is inside of the polygon because it is within the polygon to begin with. It exits with the first collision, it enters again with the second collision. If it is an odd number of collisions, it means it is outside of the polygon because the object would have to be outside of the polygon initially, colliding with the polygon, and then the one collision would be that the movement of the line is entering into the polygon, so it was outside of the polygon initially. I forget how the mathematical system works, so I have probably butchered my explanation of this, but I trust me, it worked. I tested it. Trust me. I know what I'm doing. Trust me. There's a Wikipedia page for it. The number of collisions when drawing a line through a polygon dictate if the point is inside or outside of the polygon. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. If the boid has been dictated to be outside of the polygon, I will shoot it in its head. If the point has been dictated to be outside of the polygon, I will take the boid and I will move it back to the nearest point along the line of the polygon's edge by a value of whatever I feel like. Originally I had it so the boid would be instantly moved to the actual edge of the polygon surface, but this didn't work very well. I felt like it made it a bit awkward in movements, and I would rather have a level of smoothing applied, even if it did allow the boids to clip occasionally, so I just have this move on a lerp value back to the edge of the polygon collider by a value of how much they have exited the polygon. So more extreme exits will be pulled back faster, while subtle exits will be more smoothly pulled back to the edge of the polygon. And that is how the boid system works. I shall now talk about the visual of the boids. The visual design of the boids are very simple. They are little gems that have wings and little grabby hands. These have a lore reason to look like this, and also because I thought insects that look like gemstones are kind of funny, it coincides with the actual weird little gems that Pep-Pel collects. It has the grabby hands from the intro cutscene. Lore, maybe? Is this some lore I sniff? What's that smell? It's lore. I like them being weird and grabby. I was going for a design for a enemy that would have a big mass of a body with these weird grabby hands coming out of it. The way I do the grabby hands is by having an animator attached to each individual boid that has an animation, and then I have their hands moving in whatever direction they are moving in. So these hands are reaching outside of the boid pile, grabbing at Pep-Pel in a weird, gross little manner. I think they look real creepy. I love the little boids. They look like weird little guys that grab Pep-Pel and smother her to death. Every single time Pep-Pel falls into a boid pile, it always looks horrifying, and I'm a big fan of how her death appears as she is swallowed up and crushed to death by these massive pile of boids. I love these guys. Can't get enough of them. Then the non-animated boids are missing their wings and arms, and to give some level of movement to these ones so they don't just look like static boids floating around, I will have these rotate either left or right based on their momentum. So if they're moving more left or more right, they will rotate left and right relative to the momentum, so this gives some level of movement to the non-animated boids. I feel like if I wasn't pointing out that some of the boids were non-animated, it would simply blend in as the actual massive boids, and occasionally you would see one that is just a body sticking out of the boid pile, but aside from that, realistically I think they look perfectly fine. The boid color scheme will randomly generate through a selection of different colors that are available for the boids, with one color being dictated as the primary color and another color being dictated as a secondary color from a selection of 20 different colors, most of these being pastel colors because the boids' visual designs are inspired by the Paris sprites from My Little Pony, and they are colorful little bug thingies. I think this adds a lot of variety to the actual boids' visuals. I think this makes them look very interesting and unique, especially in the level that is an entire silhouette, because everything else is dark and either black or dark green, and then the boids are all colourful little bug thingies, so they stand out very heavily in this level's design, and I really like how they look. I also just like bright colours. I am very excited for how the boids have turned out in Pep-Pel. It was a mechanic I was originally not very excited to make and add, because originally a big car drove past my window. Because originally the Beast Brutality level, as you know, was going to have a big monkey that punches Pep-Pel in the brain, and this design fell through. I was unmotivated to make it. I felt like the level was very uninteresting because of this, and I really didn't like the level because of this, and this decentivized me to really work on the bug brutality level. But making the boids, I have now revitalized my joy of Pep-Pellington, because the boids are one of my favorite mechanics in Pep-Pel so far. I think they are weird and little rascally little boys, and I am a little bit disappointed that they only appear in the second to last level of Pep-Pel, but so it goes with game mechanics. Some of them have to appear at the end. Whatever, baby. Maybe I'll throw them in this first level's hard mode for funny. And that is it for Devlog. I'm going to go play Big Run in Splatoon now. Big mode, Splatoon. Big boy, big snake. Next devlog will be probably about the visual design of the Beast Brutality level, which, as you can tell visually, I didn't draw anything new for, because I had this cool idea for silhouette designs. So there won't be much to talk about. Okay, goodbye. I'm going to open the microphone with my hand now. Bye bye.